Howdy, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Okayest Trapper podcast. As always, we are brought to you by Mountain Tough Fitness. With workout and meal plans tailored toward outdoor-focused lifestyles, MountainToughFitness.com can have you ready for the spring runoff in no time. Check them out, MountainTough.com, that's MTNTOUGH, and use the promo code OKS30 for a 30-day free trial. Now, my guest today grew up on the East Coast, where he learned to trap raccoon and fox, but nearly 2 decades ago, he moved out west to Montana. He then sought out formal education in natural resource management, focusing on both wildlife and forestry management, before spending a decade in the outdoor retail industry. When he's not participating in trapping, hunting, fishing, or other outdoor consumptive use activities, you can find him spending time with his daughter or moonlighting as the VP West of the Montana Trappers Association. Chris Morgan, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, man. I know we've talked a little bit over really the past year, on and off, usually through social media of all things. And then when I started the show, I had reached out and was curious if you'd hop on and talk, because I know you have quite a background in playing the part of helping us really figure out how we want to put the image forward for trapping. And we're going to get into that a lot today, I'm sure. But, I really want to start the conversation around, your background. You're from Pennsylvania, and to kind of frame it, can you recount like your earliest memory of ever being on a trap line?
So probably my earliest memory, I don't know if I'd call it a trap line or not. We did a lot of, it was kind of more damage control type things. My dad ran a whitetail deer farm, and with having that, you have feed troughs, everything else. And we'd always have raccoons and opossums in the feed, and kind of started off there a little bit, mainly cage trapping. One day we kind of got, I don't know, for adventurous like young kids do, and we went up to a barn that we had, found some of my dad's old footholds. My dad did a lot of trapping in the it was late 70s, early 80s. He got really serious about it when the big fur boom was there, but he trapped muskrats and everything else as a farm kid growing up, and saw his footholds. And of course they've been hanging on a shelf for who knows how long, 20 years, and they were all rusty, but we played with them and kind of messed around and talked him into teaching me how to use those. So I remember, I think the first thing we ever caught together was a red fox. And I thought that was just the coolest thing ever. It was super neat. And my dad, he trapped mainly, for money, gas money back there in the days. He wasn't, I guess he was pretty serious about it, but it wasn't, something he did as much as I do now. But it definitely lit a fire. And I can remember the first animal I ever caught in a foothold by myself was a big boar raccoon. And I don't even remember, I don't know how I caught the thing, but it was on a little feeder stream, and I just set a trap there on a big long branch as a drag, and went back 2 days later and had a raccoon. So I was pretty stoked about that.
That's awesome. Do you remember how old you were when that happened?
And well, whenever I set my foothold, my dad was really pretty strict following laws, and in Pennsylvania you had to be 10 years old to run actually 10 traps. I trapped with him before that, but cage trapped, everything like that before that too. But that first foothold, that was my first year that I could actually set a trap on my own self.
That's awesome. I'm sure that was a pivotal moment in your life, especially when you have the hindsight, right? Where you're at now, looking back on that particular catch. Was trapping and specifically raccoons something that you were already thinking about as a kid too, like outside of just your exposure on the whitetail deer farm and your dad? Like, a lot of folks I've talked to on this podcast who've been trapping their whole lives, who are around our age bracket, read where the red fern grows, or had some other media outlet at the time that was kind of pushing it. Was it just how you were brought up and what you were doing with your dad, or did you have some other influences that kind of pulled you in as well?
A lot of it. Also, being adventurous, Snoopy kids, we found old photo albums of my dad trapping, and he has I actually still have it somewhere. I just moved here about 3 months ago, and that seems like it's should have been a long enough time to get unpacked, but it isn't. But I has a big metal box of old fur fishing game magazines, and I remember kind of looking through those, and just thumbing through those. We grew up in it was more of a hunting household. We did everything outdoors. I mean, I had the perfect childhood for a kid, wanting to get into it. I grew up. We lived on 50 acres. It was all wooded, had streams and different hills and everything else you could ask for, and spent most of the time adventuring, going out and having fun. And I knew every inch of that country. So, but it just kind of lended itself with the lifestyle.
And then you moved to Montana. Was that a family move, or was that you as you started to get a little bit older? Like, what drew you out west from Pennsylvania, where you had this, picturesque 50 acres, you could play, you could do whatever you wanted? Was it, just that further call to adventure, or something else?
Yeah, somewhat. I mean, I went to school at Penn State, and I got a wildlife degree. And when I was there, I met some really, really, really like-minded people. And in, well, I'll back up just a touch. Prior to going to college, my sophomore year, my dad brought me out to Colorado, and we did a public land elk hunt. And he said, growing up, his dad did the same thing. He always used to go out west, every other couple years, and wanted us to experience it. And I thought it was the coolest thing ever. And I love the country. So then, let's fast forward back to where it was. My one of my really good friends said, "Hey, we found out really quick having a degree in wildlife was a cool thing to have, but you're not really going to make a living off of it really quick. Counting rabbit pellets studies and all kinds of different things like that. It was like, for minimum wage, like, wow, well, okay, well, what's the next best thing?" And so we started kind of looking into it, and we decided we were going to try to, go for forestry as well. And we kind of just one night made up our minds that, hey, it'd be kind of neat to go to a Western school to do that, and picked University of Montana. So it was kind of one of those, sat down on the computer and did a little bit of research, figured out where we wanted to go, and that's how we got here. We loaded up a U-Haul that was way overloaded, and I actually smoked a transmission on the way out here, but we got here.
So your wildlife education at Penn, and you were doing some work. Were you working for like Pennsylvania Fish and Game at the time, doing some of those studies, or where were you working as you started to get the eye towards forestry and coming out west?
A lot of that was actually built into the program in school. So I never actually physically did that, but it led into some of the jobs that we were looking at, and there wasn't a whole lot, that's for sure.
Yeah, I can empathize. I had a, dare I say, useless undergraduate degree. Much to my father's chagrin, he's like, "You're not going to be able to do anything with it," and he was right. And had to pivot hard after completing that college education. So you come out west, and what was it for forestry? Were you interested in firefighting? Like what? I don't know much about the forestry, you know, education as a whole. So maybe give me a brief on that, and then maybe talk about how that marries well with what you had already known from a wildlife perspective.
So I guess we didn't really have quite an idea exactly what we wanted to do with that, but our mindset was it's still something in the natural resources realm. We're still going to be working outside, doing what we love, and that's kind of where we went. And I did take some fire classes. That was part of the degree that I actually didn't finish. I have about another semester to finish that degree, and but we kind of decided we thought we were going to work for the Forest Service. And it's funny, my buddy did finish his degree and did go to work for the Forest Service and still working there, and I took different paths. So I kind of got that, you know excited kid out on his own. I don't really want to go to school anymore. Missoula, Montana is known for its fly fishing, everything else, and next thing you know, got wrapped up into other things. So
Yeah, I feel that too. So did you trap through your undergraduate time at Penn as well, or did you take a break and then pick that back up once you kind of got into the forestry school you started out in Missoula?
so for the most part, I still trapped on and off in Pennsylvania. When I moved to Montana, I was in a small apartment, and I didn't bring any of that stuff with me, because I honestly had no idea what I was getting into moving out here. I just knew I wanted to be here, and I went to the U of M for about a year and a half, and I got an opportunity to move to Helena, where I'm close enough to now, and ended up taking that and took a job over here. It was slightly after there that I started getting back into trapping again. Some of the guys I worked with did it, and I thought, hey, that'd be really cool to get back into that. I have no idea where to start. It's completely different style there to here, but I'm gonna try it.
So, Chris, when you went out west, then you're in forestry school, you see some people doing some trapping, you're interested in it, way different than what you were doing back in Pennsylvania. Was it the style of trapping? Was it a particular animal or something that you hadn't tried yet that really drew you in, or was it all of it?
Um, all the above. So growing up in Pennsylvania, when I was there, at least we had very few coyotes in our area. Coyote was a really new thing in that country, and every once in a while, you'd see a track. That was kind of cool. Relatively close to me, like my uncle had a farm probably 30 miles away. They had coyotes on their place all the time. But I had actually never seen a coyote until I moved to Montana. It just now they're all over the place. Funny. So the coyote idea kind of drew it into me. We always use 1.5, small traps like that for fox and different things because again, we that's all we had and we didn't have to worry about bigger animals. So, the kind of methods, bobcat trapping really appealed to me too because I thought they were a really cool animal and I still do. So, and just all around, one more reason to get out there and enjoy the country.
Yeah, I mean, it does. And that's one thing I always preach to people who are interested in trapping. Like, if you enjoy hunting or even fishing to a degree, the amount of time you get married to whatever trap line you have, whether it's very small, whether it's a long line, puts you out in the wilderness, which is amazing. You get more time out. It can help you as a hunter. I don't know if it can help you as a fisherman because I've never fished really, so who knows? Um,
The the understanding the animal. I mean, you that carries over to fishing guaranteed. Once you figure out where those fish lay in a pool or in a stream, find those seams. It's just like trapping. I mean, you have to be right on the money. You can't just blindly cast out there and expect to catch something. Well, I guess you, but same thing's true. You want to be consistent. You find where they are.
and then question I have is from the outside, right? This is somebody like myself who's only been trapping 6 or 7 years out west. What was the perception I have of you just from what I follow on social media is somebody who is singularly focused on preserving trapping rights through your work with MTA and anything else that you're posting. Was that always part of your makeup or was there a defining moment? And maybe it might be worth talking about like what trapping looked like when you first moved to Montana to what it is like today to kind of paint that picture of how this evolution of you as more of a warrior for trapping rights came about.
So first started trapping here, it was just like anything else, back home. I didn't even know there was such a thing as a trapping organization. That was never anything I knew about. And I'm surprised, growing up in Pennsylvania, there's like I think 8 different districts of the same trapping organization, in that state, and that state is tiny compared to Montana. But I just didn't know, it even existed. And then once I started getting into it, I got into it really hard. It was about 2008, 2009, or I started trapping 2008, 2009. Got really into it like 2010, 2011. And shortly thereafter, there was a ballot initiative to end trapping on public lands. And that was about my first exposure to this, I guess you could say, lifestyle or whatever, whatever you was is what you want to call it. And it was really scary to me because at the time I knew nobody for private land. Everything I did was on public. So I knew right away, that was something that I wanted to support and make sure that we didn't lose our trapping land on public land privileges. So I started kind of getting into that world, about that time. Didn't really get serious about it until probably another 3 years ago or so. But during that time of that ballot initiative, I can remember still to this day. I After we defeated that ballot initiative, and I joined the organization during that time. Um, the year following, I caught two bobcats on public land, and picture of them. And I just had a picture of two bobcats laying on the ground. I made a post on the MTA, said, "Hey, appreciate all your work for what you did for defeating this ballot initiative." Uh, One of our anti groups took that photo off that page and said, "Oh, look, two bobcats nestling each other for warmth, or they're scared for their lives. They're dead because the trapper, heartless trapper, killed them." And I was like, wait a minute, like that's not what happened here. And that was kind of my first exposure to antis, and it was like it left a really bad taste in my mouth, because I was like, no, like that's not what I did here. And then I started understanding, the what an agenda is, and how political this sort of thing is. And I didn't think I wanted anything to do with it. And to be quite honest with you, I still don't want anything to do with politics now. But I've realized since then it's a necessary evil. And the straw that really broke the camel's back and really set me on my course, that now I'm more concerned about protecting trapping than actual trapping, is it's been probably 5 years ago now. I caught a Christmas Day bobcat, and my daughter used to trap with me on a backpack on my back, and I took a really cool picture of it, and had me holding it, her smiling, giving a thumbs up. And that was before I was on social media. I had a private page. Well, that private page I got kicked out of it, and I had no access to it, and I couldn't figure out why. And that photo was shared on there, but only to my friends. Whenever I became, or whenever I was appointed the VP West to fill the open position, one of the groups used that photo and basically said, "Hey, here's the new VP West. He's really got it out for us." And I thought, there's only one way they could have gotten that photo, or two ways, I guess. And it was if somehow they were involved in my account being taken over, or someone who I thought was a friend gave that photo to them. And that was a real pivotal moment when I said, you know what, no one needs to feel like this. I mean, I felt completely exposed with my, at the time she was like 2 year old daughter on my, like, really, like, attack me all you want. I'm a grown man. I can take it. But when you expose and utilize my daughter to push her agenda, like, no, I'm gonna start showing the world what you are. So that was a big moment.
Yeah, as somebody who is the parent of a young daughter who does join me on my trap line, and obviously we do take some cool pictures together, and it's one of those things where you want to protect them and their identity and their future, but also still show the familial, the family kind of ties that trapping can bring about, and that's what it does for our family. Clearly, your family, and probably families of people listening to this podcast. But before we kind of move on, because that was a great trajectory down to like where you're at now, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But again, with a focus on newer trappers coming in, do you remember how you started to get involved in that first ballot initiative? Because, like you said, you didn't know there was a trappers association. You kind of maybe found it, wanted to get involved. And the reason I asked this question is I talked to a lot of new trappers who are like, I know my state has an association, but how do I get involved? What can I do? I don't know anything about trapping. I'm just learning. So, I'd love to hear from you. And it doesn't have to be in the context of what you went through necessarily, but maybe advice for new trappers who do want to become involved. Like, what can they do?
So I probably went about it all the wrong ways. But my first involvement obviously was I followed their page, and I would repost anything that I thought was potentially useful information. And that, I mean, honestly, and I act like I don't have a reach now either, but I had absolutely no reach back then. So I was doing nothing to help the organization whatsoever, other than just a guy that was supportive and didn't know how to do anything. I hadn't gone to any of any of the events they put on. At that time, I was more of an archery elk hunter, and the rendezvous was in the middle of September. And a lot of guys I knew went to it, and I just said I that was my true passion, then, and I wasn't willing to give that up until I really got further into the organization, and then it was like, what, that archery elk hunting is cool. It's not going anywhere. This is what I want to protect. So. Um, I would say to someone new getting into it, go to one of these events, go to all these events, any one you can. fur sales, the the Western Regional, things like that. Any sort of we have fur handling demos. Go to those first, and kind of then start understanding what the organization is about. You see it all. It's really hard, and I still get it all the time. And I had the same questions when I was on the outside looking in. Is what does the organization actually do? And it's like I am so busy doing what the organization actually does that it's really hard to answer that question, accurately to 100 people that ask me. And I try my best to, but let's face it, I mean, we only have so much time. But if you go to those events, I mean, 99% of the time we'll have a members meeting where we sit there and chat about things that's going on. We talk about legislation, talk about, what people are seeing. And that stuff is really important if you want to truly know. Just just on the outside looking in, if you're not at those events, you're not really going to know. And we try. I mean, our media guy Ed, he puts out a ton of emails on different things, and he has some sort of algorithms that he can look and see who opens it and who doesn't, who reads them. And maybe 30% of the emails that he sends out get read, but the information is there. But I think on if someone wanted to first start getting into it, go to those events. That's the biggest thing. You meet like-minded trappers. You meet guys that are more than willing to help out and talk to you and tell you, answer your questions. You see demos. They're For me, there's no other way to there's no substitution. That's where if you're going to get into it, that's where how you're going to do it.
And in my experience too, it's also a great spot to meet mentors, because one of the questions I ask people, you know, what do you suggest for new trappers? And almost without fail, it's like find a mentor. And it's hard, right? We have YouTube as a mentor, and there's a lot of great resources there in some instances. But when you can go to one of these events in person, you might actually meet somebody who say, hey, you know what? Come out with me on my line, or let me give you this advice, or think about XYZ in this certain way. And that's, like you said, invaluable. So um, for people listening, I will put the link for Montana Trappers Association and National Trappers Association in the show notes. If you're watching the YouTube video, I'm pointing at it, but we actually have a QR code here that you can scan and check out and figure out where these events are held. But, Chris, from when you came to Montana to now, I want your thoughts on this, because when I made a trip over to Bozeman last year, mind you, never spent a lot of time in Montana, been in Idaho for quite some time trapping over here. But when I went through the Gallatin Valley straight into Bozeman, one of the first three billboards that I saw was promoting anti-trapping. I actually had to stop and pull over and take a picture of it, because it was what looked to be a very photoshopped picture of a wolf in a foothold, with some, I don't remember what the words were, and I don't think it matters, but it was, no trapping in Montana. Can you talk a bit about this movement, and when you saw the shift for like a true, not just, let's limit trapping, but really all out push for banning trapping in Montana?
Yeah, I honestly think I didn't know it at the time, but I think it's been around since before I even moved to Montana. Like 2005. Um, and as far as I recall, I think a couple of the organizations were around slightly after that time period. I mean, it started about my entrance in to Montana, so hopefully I wasn't to blame for that by any ways. But so I mean, it's been around about that time, and the thing about it now is they kind of have shifted what they do, how they do it. That ballot initiative was defeated by, I mean, it was like a 60-40 split, which in political and that sort of the realm, that's a huge margin. I think they only won two counties, and that was like Missoula and Gallatin, around the more liberal cities. So that sent a pretty resounding no. Like you're not going to come at just trapping and win. But now we see a lot of things where, uh, well, we call it weaponization of the Endangered Species Act. Well, there's grizzlies in that area, and because these people are out trapping wolves, they could then technically take that grizzly and affect their status. And for the record, there has been one wolf taken in a grizzly trap since we started about a decade ago, and it was released unharmed. But they throw out these hypothetical scenarios, and they find, I don't know if I'd call them activist judge, but they find judges that are far more willing to consider their pleas than other judges, and then they grant these injunctions like we had this last year where we lost the first month of our wolf trapping season and the last month of our wolf trapping season. So they know just heading straight on at trapping isn't going to work really well. And but the the makeup of Montana is changing daily, and we're getting people from all over. So that's not to say that a ballot initiative down the road might do a little bit better than the one before, but for the time being, that's kind of how they do things now. Is they pick apart different things that they know will affect trapping, versus just going straight for trapping, and that's been, I hate to say it, it's been effective for them. Recently, actually, just yesterday, I saw, and I need to look into it a little bit further, is federal courts are now getting to where you can no longer judge shop, is what they call it. So these groups that can't take a lawsuit and directly go and hand deliver it to a judge, it's going to be through a pool of judges that they don't get to select. So we might see a lot of that. I mean, that was really good news. I don't know how quickly that takes effect. It won't affect our current lawsuit that we have going on, but going forward, that's gonna curb a lot of that kind of activity. So that's good to see. That was their number one play in their playbook, and taking that away from them, that should surely help.
And you actually address one of the questions I have listed out in my little sheet beside me, which was this recent injunction this year. And I'll let you give the context since you're in Montana, but the highest level is something was filed. Um, what it did was it caused that first month of wolf season, which is usually when there's less snow and probably a little bit better conditions for people to get out and stay out longer, to be nixed, gone. And not only that, the time that was lost while that injunction happened wasn't tacked on to the back end of the season. It was just poof,
Taking
gone. So maybe you can talk a little bit about what happened there, because you said these injunctions have been, unfortunately effective, but maybe piece it out for people who aren't in Montana and what exactly happened there.
So there was a lawsuit brought against the state, and again, it was concerning grizzly bears, and that wolf trapping was going to affect the status of grizzly bears in the state. And they took it to a judge who is a retired federal judge. He's no longer an appointed judge. He's a retired federal judge. And again, judge shopping. In the past, he has rolled in their favor more times than not. He was actually the one who relisted wolves about a decade ago or so now, and then one of our senators, our U.S. senators, actually got them delisted through Congress. So they took it to this judge, and the way the way my perception of how this works is, there's the Equal Access to Justice Act, which essentially will refund these companies their legal fees, their expert witness fees. It was never designed to make these wealthy organizations more wealthy, but that's how they utilize it. So that they go after that, and all they have to do is basically get a shadow of a doubt that they have an accurate case, and a judge granting them an injunction then does that. So they can collect money off of it, unfortunately. So what this injunction did is it took a month off the front of our season and a month off the back of our season, because if we were going to be out and about, then that's when grizzlies were going to be out and about too. So and it's funny, I just now saw, literally this morning, I saw, oh, the first grizzly's been spotted in Yellowstone, and it's our season was slotted to end tomorrow, but instead it ended at February 15th. So um, and it's unfortunate. The state has done numerous different things to try to avoid non-target grizzly captures, and they've done an excellent job. Obviously, like I said, we've had one, and that was prior to our floating start date, and different things there. So it in my opinion, and I hate to say this because I'm not trying to throw anyone under the bus, but if it were truly about the grizzly bears, we would not have upland bird hunting. We would not have archery hunting. We would not even have fly fishing until when we were certain that grizzlies, were denned up for the year, because all three of those activities every year kill grizzlies. And but the thing is, you try to attack, a group that's significantly larger than the group they're going after. It's never going to happen. So, but again, hopefully, this new deal going on where they can't judge shop should slow that process down considerably. So,
And
we're
yeah, well, fingers crossed on that. But for new trappers and people trying to work with their associations, is there anybody else out there other than Montana Trappers Association combating these lawsuits? I mean, are there other groups, or is MTA, the National Trappers Association, are they the ones that, like, with the bulwark that are getting behind rallying against these things that are infringing on existing trapping rights, or are there other avenues? And I say that because I want it to be very front and center for people listening that these things are happening. Like, the effects were felt this year for Montana trappers. And, whether you join your association or not for, 30, $40 a year, like, they're the ones fighting it. And let me know if there are other ones out there doing the same thing, but maybe help paint that picture of like the real need and what goes into this.
There's numerous organizations that are doing it. I mean, one on a very large scale level is the Sportsman's Alliance. They do a ton for trapping, for hunting, for everything. Sorry, cat came into the room looking for me. Anyhow, they do a ton for every outdoor group, and especially lately they've been focusing a lot on trapping because it's come under fire as much, and it's kind of that mentality that united we stand, divided we fall, and we're getting smaller and smaller amounts of us, so we got to stick together. So they've been really, really, really monumental on that. There's a group here recently we just chose to send some money to support. They're working on a delisting in the lower 48 of gray wolves, and that's Hunter Nation. Those guys, they have a lot of, I guess you call them celebrity individuals who are on their side trying to push for this. And it's going to do nothing but help us out here out in the West, because it's going to take some of the heat off of us. And at the same time, though, it'd be great. The Midwestern states, or the Great Lakes states, have higher wolf densities than we have, and they have no way to manage them really right now. So it would be great to see that to help those guys out. So
That's awesome. And I'm even wearing my howl for wildlife. Sure,
but
there's a lot of great work going on.
a lot of people don't know what Howl for Wildlife does, and my goodness, they were so effective in our last legislative session at helping us out. It was great. I mean, it was so good to see. It simplified things so easily, because I always, ask people, hey, please send emails to your representatives. Please talk to these, and no, everybody seems to think it takes so much time to do that. Well, it really doesn't. But then in the grand scheme of things, I mean, How for Wildlife made it so it's 2 clicks away. I mean, you can type your message and you can send it to numerous individuals just at the click of a button, instead of doing multiple emails and multiple venues. And because I mean, if you go wide scale and you're really trying to support it, it takes a lot of time to do everything individually. Hal definitely made that so much simpler, and I mean, we're really grateful to have those guys on board.
Yeah, shout out to John Stallone and those guys who are out, fighting the good fight there. Um, from your perspective, bringing the spotlight back to trappers associations, I had a good conversation with the government affairs lead for the Oregon Trappers Association, and we were talking shop, and he was letting me know we need more voices out there that are pro trapping and do it in a tasteful, beneficial way. But he shared a stat that was interesting with me, or for me, which was they have access to everybody who owns a trapping license and had made at least one successful take that year. And I think he said out of all the trappers in that state, roughly 16, 17%, and I might be remembering that number wrong, but it was low, were actually members of their state organization. But are often some of the loudest with saying, hey, like protect my rights. Like we need to make sure that we keep trapping around. So as a member of Montana Trappers Association, what do you see as the future? How do we attract more people to be members and to be active in this pursuit? Because a lot of trappers by nature, myself included, are kind of recluses. Like we just want to be left alone. Um, and that makes for a difficult draw to get people to be involved. So how do you think we rectify that moving forward?
Well, I'll tell you this much. I don't know that you're ever going to get everybody on board. And without putting a negative spin on it, everyone has their own personal interest. Everybody has their own, um, concerns on their trap line. Everyone has, they're looking out for themselves. Um, I try to look out, I try to see the broad spectrum, try to do as best as I can for everybody as a whole. Um, we passed some legislation this past year that it gave us trapping reciprocity. We had a little bit of questions on it going into the session and during. There was some pushback a little bit, um, but it wasn't until after it was passed that people started really complaining about it. And we said, like, look, guys, understand that this is not going to open up the floodgates. Idaho does it, and they have minimal licenses coming in every year. And I think this year I got some stats a while back, and we actually sold because before we allowed non-residents to come in and trap everything but fur bearers, so coyotes, everything like that. We actually sold fewer trapping licenses this year, and there were only 12 or 15 that actually got the fur bearer option. So there was some, I guess, some hangups in the trapper education portion of it too. So maybe next year we'll see more, but we didn't have the huge flood. But that angered some people, and I know some people personally who are no longer members because of that legislation. So it's always going to be a challenge, and you know it, I'm to the point now where I don't really care about my own personal trapping. I mean, I do obviously, and I get out and do it as much as I can, but I'm more worried about, it as a whole. Like, how do we continue this? And we do that by strength in numbers. And previously, we had people who were not members because, they're from neighboring states said, I can't trap in Montana, so why do I need to be a member? So you're always going to have, fixes that fix the problem, but then they also create a problem. So I would say, yeah, I mean, I don't, there might be some states where they have 30% of their trappers that are, actual members. And I think that would probably be doing great. I'd love to see more. But the problem is you're never going to be able to make everybody happy. You're always going to have somebody out there that feels like the organization is working against them, which personally, maybe that might be true. I mean, we're not doing it intentionally, but as a whole, I shouldn't say we have to sacrifice some things sometimes, but we have to focus on others and not put attention to where some folks might think we need to be putting attention. So it's tough. It really is. I guess going into it open minded, just know that we have everybody's interest involved, and if that means that a couple people aren't going to get what they want, it's unfortunate. I mean, I've lost friends because of it, and it is what it is. But I try to be as honest as I can. Say, look, guys, I this might not even affect me ever, but in the grand scheme of things, if it keeps trapping alive for all of us, for my kids, for my daughter, for our kids, that's where I'm going to go with it. So it's a hard position to be in, and I just try to be as honest about it as I can. So
Yeah, and threading that needle is so hard, and it's even harder because of the means of communication of this generation too. And that was another question I wanted to ask you. You know, you see it on the hunting side. It's extremely loud right now, meaning you have influx of new hunters, whether that's Western hunting, whitetail hunting, pig hunting, and we do live in a generation of social media and people, like you mentioned, just taking that one picture for a private page with you and your daughter, and it got weaponized, right? And we've seen that in hunting where you have the grip and grin, where you might have bloody picture or something. And for whatever reason, the big game side of the house seems to be less impacted, but it is still being hit with like, we need to cut out all grip and grin photos, like, keep it to what the core is, which is hunting for sustenance. But the problem is you have people who do the whole lot. You have people who are sustenance hunters to trophy hunters. And in the trapping world, personally, I view it as the same. Like you have professional trappers who might not even have a social media account, all the way to people who are, more on my end of the spectrum where I am a hobby trapper, but nonetheless, like it is something that I can get excited about. And we do want to share these things. So from your perspective on social media, are there things that we can do as a community? Again, you can't do a prescription for everybody, but like some broad guidelines of like what's worked where you can still share your passion, but without also negatively impacting like the work these organizations are doing.
In the end, there's really nothing that we can ever post that can't be weaponized. There's just no doubt about it. I mean, these groups have photoshopped photos. They have spun narratives, and they take things out of context. They could take this chat out of context and use it against me, and just I don't know how they could, but they will. That's the truth about it. So um, I would say, social media is a necessary evil. It is a way that I can contact and connect with people in, a split second, whereas I can't make 200 phone calls in 10 minutes, So it has helped out a lot there, and it's extended the organization's reach quite a bit. But we do have to be kind of careful about what we say and do. I mean, I follow the antis a lot because, I don't like to call my enemy, but know your enemy type thing, and I try to stay up to date with what they're doing and try to, kind of understand where I think they're going next. And I've again, I do, do a lot of things that I've upset some people because I said, hey guys, this is what I'm foreseeing they're pushing to, and I kind of see, that going on here. So let's try to curb that back. Um, just it really boils down to respecting the animal. And I think that's the same with hunting, everything else. Um, I, uh, I again try not to put anybody down, but like the snarling pictures, sometimes I don't think are all that great. And I understand some people post them because they say, look, this just goes to show that coyotes aren't the lovely creatures that everybody thinks they are. Which, I mean, it's a double-edged sword. And I again, I know a lot of people have really good intentions, but the opposition does not have those same intentions, and they'll take that context completely out of it and say, oh, this poor coyote was trapped in fear for its life, and the trapper was poking a stick at it, taking photos at it. They do stuff like that all the time, and it's frustrating. And I personally don't want to see the individual trapper who took that photo, attacked and weaponized and taken out of context, because it's not a good feeling. I mean, I've been there, and it's frustrating. So yeah, the biggest thing, just respect the animal. I mean, I still do take a lot of pictures of animals and traps, and it's not that I don't post them as much because I'm worried about the image, but I just a lot of times, as I'm walking up, I'll snap a quick photo, dispatch, and I've been taking a lot of tailgate photos or pictures of me holding the animal, and I think that probably does just as good as anything else. And just if you're taking 5, 10 pictures of the same coyote in the same trap every day, I think it maybe creates a bad image that maybe we're not trying to dispatch that animal as fast, and that's leads to then they're, oh, it's so cruel because we're just leaving these animals in traps for our own pleasure. There's so many different ways they can spin it against us. Just I think long and short of it, is be respectful to the animal, and that anything you do going forward, then I mean, there's only so much we can do to defend ourselves. But I don't know. That's kind of my take on it. I'm not gonna bash anybody, tell anybody, don't do that. There are some photos now and then, if you get super muddy photos, or it's like uh that animal, and a lot of times those really muddy photos come from back east where they have a 24-hour check, trap check. So no, that animal hasn't been sitting there making, walling in its own mess for days. No, it's probably been 2, 3 hours. It's just their soil is so much more moist than ours out here that that animal gets muddy quick. So again, just trying to anything you can see that is a narrative the antis use, anything you can use to try to take that away from them, I think is better to promote.
Perfect. And we're getting kind of closer up to the end of the show, so I kind of have like a lightning round of questions that I ask every guest. Um, First, kind of in the same vein, what do you see, whether it's from the anti groups or just the public in general? What do you think the biggest misconception about trapping is for the general public or even the anti community?
The biggest general misconception I think is I see it all the time. Oh, these guys just go toss traps everywhere and they catch everything that comes along. Um, that's not the case. I mean, trapping is hard, and to be effective and efficient and consistent, it's hard. I mean, it's something that you have to learn. And um, boy, I have at times I'll have a lot of traps out, but I check a lot of empty traps because it depends on your population. It depends on the time of year. It depends on a lot of things, and people just don't see that. So whenever I see these things pop up where, oh, a trap was found at a trailhead and it was uncovered and everything else, it's like, yeah, that wasn't a trapper that put that trap there because we know better, but the public doesn't. So
Yeah, that makes total sense. Now, putting on your hat of, Chris, whether that's 10 years ago, 20 years ago, what was the biggest mistake you ever made on your trap line? And then what's the biggest mistake you've ever made in the fur shed? Any point in your career, just, an egregious mistake.
biggest mistake I ever made on the trap line, hands down, bed and traps solid. I again, I grew up kind of just putting traps in creeks, in Pennsylvania, and didn't realize that that soft dirt around your set, just that alone will make a coyote dig or a fox dig. And a lot of guys always say, well, they smelled your trap and dug it up. And I firmly disagree with that without trying to, make enemies. Whenever I first started out here, it's sandy soil, so it's kind of hard to pack. It's not like the clay back east. And I would just basically put a trap in there and cover it up. And I was getting so many dug up traps, and I didn't understand why. And YouTube wasn't really big back then, and there were some decent videos out there. So I started, finding as much as I could. And the guys that I knew that trap weren't really tight-lipped, but they weren't really willing to share, a lot of stuff. So I started figuring out, well, maybe, I need to pack these in tighter. And still remember the first trap that I packed in super tight. I'm like, I don't even think this thing's going to go off. But it did. And I literally caught the fox that had been digging all my sets up, and it was like an aha moment. So I would say the biggest thing, yeah, definitely land trapping, pack those traps in tight. Um, in the fur shed, uh, just knowing what animals are supposed to look like when they're finished. My very first bobcat, which just so happened to be the first animal I trapped in Montana, it was a female kitten actually, or young of the year, and I didn't know anything at all what they were supposed to look like. I put it up on a coyote board, and it was as wide as it was long, and yeah, that reflected in the price, and that reflected in the overall finish, and it looked. I look back on it now and I just laugh, and it's like, if you're gonna take the time and effort to finish your furs, know how they're supposed to be finished, and take it to the extent of buying the best equipment you can to finish fur that you can. So
That makes sense. Yeah, I've been there before on the bad put ups where you're like, I'm not even sure if that's the same animal, but it's a good learning
yep.
move for sure. Okay, so last question. This is a hypothetical. This is what I like to do with folks. So, Chris, you can either guarantee trappers' rights for the next 10 years nationwide, but in order to do so, you lose the ability to speak and have to live alone in a cabin with the most prominent animal rights activists for 1 year. Or you can guarantee trappers' rights for the next 10 years nationwide, but you yourself are unable to hunt, trap, or fish for the next 5 years.
I think I'm gonna fall on option number two, sword. Boy, for anyone who hasn't done it, you walk into a room with some of these people and they absolutely hate your existence. They don't even know you, and it makes for a very awkward time. I like to think I'm pretty mentally tough, but I don't think I could spend too much time with them. There are some people that I have found common ground with, and that's great. That's where we're headed. But there's some people that, if they're full on activists, I don't think I could do that. I would rather, sit back and let people enjoy it for 5 years and then go enjoy it for 5 years and work on the next 10. So
Awesome. Well, that's great. Chris, I really appreciate the time you've taken to sit here and talk with me today. I've learned a lot personally. I hope listeners have, and how they can get involved. Um, where can people find and follow you to kind of keep up with some of these different things? Anything you want to plug here before we round it out for the day?
I'm pretty active on Facebook. That's about it. I do have an Instagram account where I do more of my family type stuff, but I don't post on there a whole lot. But yeah, I mean, if you want to try to keep up with what's going on, I'm pretty active on Facebook. The
Yep.
MTA, a lot of times, you don't follow me, they share a lot of the things that I post, and then they have a lot of things that I share. So, back and forth. But the MTA's Facebook page is really good too. You can also go on the MTA website and sign up for emails, even if you're not a member. If you're just kind of curious of what they do, and I think most organizations do that. But yeah, I would say that's probably the best options there.
Awesome. Well, Chris, again, I appreciate it. You've been very kind to me, and for people who might be nervous to reach out to people, I've reached out to Chris with questions. He's always answered. I'm sure he would do the same for you as time allows, as we discussed earlier. So reach out, get involved, and hopefully everybody's out and can check some trap lines, even though the season's winding down. Chris, thank you, and everybody stay tuned for another episode of the Okayest Trapper podcast.